are to talk about producing an inclusive digital world, and we've been doing a lot of work at Business in the Community on the unintended consequences of that. So we've gathered a pretty fabulous panel, I hope you will agree, to talk about that, but it's very much a question time, so I'm going to set up very briefly. We're going to have maybe a question or two to start with, but then the key thing is you're super punchy and give us some great questions. Well, I can say that now till you've asked them, in which case we start throwing the glasses out into the audience. But I thought I'd give you just a couple of things just to be sort of kicking off the issue and what a dilemma it can be. So if you're a cleaner on a 0 hours contract, the unreliability of your income may prevent you from having a mobile phone contract. And as more and more home services are delivered via an app, as a cleaner, you won't be able to actually operate. So you are therefore excluded from the very job which is arguably one of the most undigital that there is. And there the two paths begin to diverge. Or, as deep learning emerges ever deeper, or as we were reflecting on this morning, ever darker, imagine Kindle is upgraded with face recognition and biometric sensors, which frankly, it exists already. It will read your face as you read the book, and then with a good intention of learning what you like. However, if you're one of the 1 in 10 people who are abused at home and sadly have to endure violence in the home, as you're reading that book, the anguish on your face will be responding at a different moment. And the algorithm, or the face recognition, then spots something different. And some other company scrapes the data, who knew, and before you know it, what's happened is that someone is making a judgment about your suitability for employment. And before you know it, you haven't got a job. And before you know it, the safe harbour that was your employment from that awful toxic environment at home is no longer there for you. And I say that because this world, these are the consequences, and we're surrounded by that playing out in its different forms every day, as we only have to read the news to know. So an old boss of mine, who was a trainee at an accountancy firm several years ago, he said one day in a meeting, "I feel," and he was very quickly put down. And he was told by XX, very pompous accountancy firm, they're not like that today, clearly, "We don't feel here, we think." Well, if we're serious about digital inclusivity, then we need to get back to feeling, and in the full knowledge of the algorithms that have learned what we feel, and having thought to the end of the sentence as of all our actions. So my plea is that we should all obsessively pursue the application of humanity in the face of technological advances. So we have been doing some work on this. We began it 3 years ago. It was called The Brave New World. And we gathered together against 4 priorities where we should be applying our thinking. And we're now taking that to the next level, really getting some champion companies to come on board and really think through the various priorities and make sure that we really are thinking through these consequences before we're actually right in the face of them and frankly having to apologise for them. Because if only people had thought that through in the first place, it would have been good. So, we've had trailblazers of the digital revolution by virtue of the leaders in this, in terms of Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and Grace Hoppers. And I'm not functioning at quite that same level, but I feel we have some revolutionaries of our own in this audience and on the panel who are obsessively pursuing the application of humanity. So I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to kick off. So Moya Greene, the Chief Executive of the Royal Mail, and I know there's a summary of her brilliant biog in your papers, but she's at the top of every one of the most powerful lists you ever want to be at the top of, and she brilliantly never wears her importance. She is warm and witty and smart, and I love the fact that she's been in public service and private companies throughout her career, something I wish everyone would do. Elizabeth Fagan started her career teaching chemistry, so a public servant at the start, and was the first female managing director of Boots. She's a passionate advocate of sustainability and corporate responsibility. She's the president of ISBAR. She's a wise, thoughtful, and brilliant champion of the cause. Chris Jones has run City and Guilds Group very successfully for 10 years. He's a huge advocate of youth training and ensuring recruitment is inclusive, and prides himself on his vocational background, so he really does know what he's talking about. His support on our employment board has been quite fabulous. And finally, and last but not least, Peter Cheese is the Chief Executive of CIPD, prior to which he was a global MD at Accenture. I don't think, reading his bio, there is a management accolade he hasn't got, and he's got 2 honorary doctorates to boot. His whole life has been dedicated to the future of work, leadership, people, and skills. So I've got some questions to kick off, but I really feel there's enough E and IQ in this room to put to rights this issue. And there's no point in us having a warm bath in the next 40 minutes. Be it job losses, data manipulation, algorithm abuse, or exclusion, in our time together, we should really get after this. So let's not sleepwalk into some pretty awful things, and let's have some punchy questions in about 2 minutes or so. Great. So, Moya, I'm going to kick off with you. I'm going to tell everyone what my questions are, so we can either go there or not go there. I figure that might be the best way. And I'm going to be asking, what event or person made you realize inclusion is so important? What barriers have you encountered in the implementation of this work? Because we know that's often the thing that gets in the way. What keeps you up at night? And what has given you hope that the digital revolution will be inclusive? So what person or event made you realize this is pretty important?
I think since I've been here in the UK, I would have to say my unions. I have great leaders in my unions. I know that this is probably a surprise to you, since we came within a hair's breadth before Christmas of having a national strike. Thankfully, we averted it. But at the top of my unions, we have some very intellectual people who are dealing with every day the difficulty that our people, our employees, some of the best people in the UK, all 140,000 of them, the difficulty that they face in adapting to what is now a huge amount of change, getting faster all the time. You know, when I came to the UK, we had not modernized the company. And, you know, that was a factor that really held Royal Mail back. It wasn't profitable, hadn't made any money in the UK in about a decade. And thankfully now, 8 years later, we have changed the operation completely. But that has taken a toll on people. We've had to completely rebuild the technology backbone of the company. So not a single job in the operation is the way it was, has the tasks it used to have 8 years ago. And sadly, for our people, that is going to have to continue. And I actually think that businesses and people like me in business, we are overconfident about the ability of our enterprises to change and to adapt. And mostly, it is because the change takes place at an individual human being level. We always say organizational change, but the organization is just a construct. It's just a group of people. And it's very hard for people to learn new things, to do something in a completely different way. And, you know, our posties today, who are some of the most trusted people in the UK, if they looked at their job today and they compared it to what they did 5 years ago, it would be honestly completely different. And in fact, you know, some of the big challenges that all businesses in my sector, in the postal sector, you know, the whole IT revolution, the thing, your email, your WhatsApp, all the messaging systems that we now use, that meant that there was a huge structural decline in letters. But glad for us, happily for us, those exact same technologies, those platforms produced online shopping. And so now we have a growing revenue stream. It's parcels, and we are the #1 parcel company in the UK today. So the very same internet that caused our industry to go into structural decline is now being used in a different way, so that we, the consumer, we're shopping, we're doing things in a different way, but we're not going to the stores as much as we used to do. We're doing everything from our laptop, from our phone. Well, for us, that means that our postie, he's got to do things in a completely different way. It's heavier, he's got to wait at the doorstep more, he's got to use technology to confirm that he's delivered. He can't just be content to deliver through the letterbox. If we're not home, we expect our postie to take the parcel to some safe place that we have designated. We expect them to be there at a particular time. So I mention all of this just to say, even a 500-year-old treasured institution like Royal Mail has had to completely change everything about what we do and how we do it. And I would say that the most important thing for people like me, as a leader of these organizations, because I'm sure it's affecting every organization, this rapid change, is that we are overconfident and we overestimate the ability of people to adapt. And so it was my unions who really have brought that home to me.
Okay, great. Thank you. Fantastic. Chris.
I'll keep this very simple. A young man called Martin Gadd, aged 27, bright, articulate, sportsman, university graduate, incredibly digital savvy, sadly paralyzed from the chest down, told by his local job centre, "You're on benefits. Why do you want to work?" Which I found shocking. And the sense that actually we as an organisation, Sitting Girls Group, could actually harness the skills, the abilities and the talent of not only this young man, but many, many others like him, to fill much needed roles in our organisation, to address some of our own material skill gaps. And that sense that actually we as organisations need to work harder, whether it's digital revolution or frankly any other revolution, to break down those barriers, to make these people feel welcome, respected, and actually contributing. And that to me was, yeah, it was literally smack between the eyes. We have to do more to address those issues.
And so parallel to that, so I'll ask you two at once, what therefore keeps you up at night?
On a broader stage, it's not only how do we create an environment, and this within Sitting Girls Group particularly, one where we make all of the opportunities available to everyone in society, whether they are able or disabled, young or old, whether they have achieved something in academic education, or frankly, as we are now saying, there is no job where you have to have a qualification, because we want to create an environment that is fair for all. And part of that is then aligned to how we continue to support a retrain agenda, how we think harder about our people. I think all too often around this debate around technology, we forget the human, and I think we have to make sure we put more of the human and the humane back into the dialogue, and that to me is so, so important.
Elizabeth.
So probably when I was teaching, first of all, and if you're teaching a comprehensive school, then you have a mixed population. I was a science teacher. And you see then kids of mixed ability, and you can see the smart ones and you can see the less smart intellectually, but actually everybody's got something to contribute. So the greatest satisfaction I think you get as a teacher is actually helping any child to be the best they possibly can be, and actually getting other children to accept each other is and it was touched on today by a number of the speakers this morning. So I think you learn it very, very early in life when you're a teacher that the route to success is actually by making the team work better, the pupils support each other, they bring out the best in each other, and your job is to facilitate that. But in work, it's Boots. Boots is a bit like Moya's been saying, Boots has been around for 170 years. It's been in every single community in the UK for 170 years. And if you go into any one of our pharmacies, then you will see people, and actually, Chris said it, and others said it today, you know, it's a creative organisation that genuinely has a social purpose. And so in the communities, the people that work in our pharmacies are the people that live in the communities, and they make it feel a really good place for people to be when it's quite challenging. And many of those colleagues many of our pharmacists have come in and worked as Saturday people and said, I now want to be a pharmacist, and gone off and chosen their career. And some of my executive today actually started as, you know, a Saturday person. The chief exec of Walgreens started in Boots as a Saturday boy and then went on to become the chief exec of a global corporation. So I think if we work in an organisation, actually, there are people who have different skills. Any organisation is about saying, we're successful because our people are successful. And in the digital world, or in the tech world, What will differentiate when you're a customer-facing business is the quality of the experience and how you feel your organisation is participating in its community. So it comes back to being an organisation that's community-centred and making sure that people come into that organisation to be the best they can be. And I think, most of my career, that's what I've always felt inclusion was important. So it's not any less important today than it was 35 years ago.
And Peter, what barriers do you think there are to implementation of some of this? What do you think gets in the way?
I think there are lots of barriers and challenges, and it starts with awareness and understanding. I mean, the first question intrigued me. When did I sort of really realize what was going on? I studied a subject called ergonomics at university, which I think has never been more relevant. It's about man-machine systems and computing. And then I joined a company which claimed to have put the first commercial application into, a computer application into a business, which is GE's payroll in the 1950s. And the apocryphal story is they put it in, ran it. It took more than a week to run the weekly payroll, so they took it out again and fixed it and put it back in when it could run. And those are the early days, and everybody thought, well, how many computers will we ever sell? Will it really change the world? And the answer is it has. It's already been changing the world dramatically in terms of technology. I think what we're now at is what some people have called the fourth industrial revolution, and a real acceleration of technology in every form of life. I mean, Moya, you talked about it from consumer perspectives and how it affects our daily lives. One moment in time when I realized how much things were changing was with my own children. So I got 3 daughters, 2 Gen Y, 1 Gen Z, and the Gen Z generation, so she's 20 now, are what people would call the true digital natives. She's only ever known technology. She didn't even think of it as technology. And watching her when she was very young on a computer screen trying to do basic arithmetic, and then when she got to do her GCSEs, I caught her when she was doing revision, and she chucked all her textbooks in the bin. And I said, what on earth are you doing? You're supposed to be revising this stuff. She said, I found a better YouTube video describing simultaneous equations. And of course, there's so much opportunity for technology, but there are so many issues as well, because supposing she'd found a YouTube video that told it all wrong. And where is the critical judgment of people to understand what is right, what is wrong, what is truth, what is not truth? So I think the barriers are a lot about awareness. I mean, that there is massive opportunity for technology, but the speed at which it's happening. And we know amongst business leaders, with the great exception of Elizabeth and Moya here, but there are many business leaders who don't understand it and don't understand how quickly it's affecting work and the nature of jobs. And then this point that Chris touched on, which I believe very passionately, if you look at the history of a lot of technology over the last 20 or 30 years, it has squeezed a lot of the humanity out of business. And we've driven businesses from an efficiency and a process and a standardization, and somewhere in the middle of all of that will create a job. And guess what? That job, to Matthew Taylor's point, is not a good job, because I don't have voice, it's not using my skills effectively, and therefore the outcomes of productivity and all these other things aren't happening, and indeed well-being. So I think the barriers are awareness and understanding, and then how do we harness technology effectively? How do we upskill our people? But how do we fundamentally, and I think we will touch on this, design organizations and jobs and roles that put people at the heart of it, at the very heart. And I do believe strongly in this notion of good work, that we can design jobs that have the right attributes, that make the best of people, their skills, their capabilities, their voice, and all these other things. And then we've got to build the ecosystems around them to help upskill, reskill, and give them those opportunities. Because the danger is if we don't, then we're right at the very heart of this debate, is that people get excluded right at the very point in time. And we're all finally starting to talk about inclusion in a very serious and real way.
May I just say something, Amanda,
Mm-hmm.
in response to your very eloquent, I think, expose of what we have to do as not just business leaders, but maybe all of us. Technology just allows us to do things. Sure. It sets about in front of us what is permissible, but it is actually what is possible. It is we, the people, who should be deciding what is permissible. And so I'm watching this whole Facebook problem, and it's a huge problem where something that started off to be so benign, to put university students in touch with one another, now turns out to be a tool that can fabricate stories, go all around the world at record-breaking speed, and now be used to skew election results. But we can harness that. We have to decide what the technology is going to be allowed to do and not allowed to do. And that's where I feel we're falling down. We're very quick to reap the benefits, including the profits, but we're not nearly as fast to stand back and say, okay, what do we actually want this to do? And what should we prevent it from doing? I mean, it's taken us a long time to get our arms around what these platforms make possible.
Well, what do you think gets in the way? Is it leadership? Is it courageous leadership? Is it people being willing to culturally go, what's the worst that can happen? We're not going to do that.
Well, the consumer is sleepwalking. That's a big problem. You know, the consumer doesn't know what is being done to their personal information. So one of the things that I say is that, you know, if you're not paying for something, you're not the customer. You are the product. You are being sold. And that is what is happening with many of these platform technologies that we now have. And so I think we're sleepwalking, and we have been very, very slow to think about how this can be misused. And so now we've got these massive organizations that are so powerful that I don't know how we're ever going to get them into a proper path.
Does that, there's that lovely quote, isn't it, in Homo sapiens, when it talks about our one of the last most valuable things we've got is our own data. Yeah. And here we are giving it away in emails and funny cat videos, you know, basically.
I don't know if because it's such importance. I think this Facebook thing that's going on may be one of the seminal moments where we all start to realize what's happening. Have you ever read any of the terms and conditions of any of these apps, Facebook included? Because they are pretty scary, and they always have been. They've had the right to everything, and they can continue to use it and share it with their partners. And we have to start to challenge that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great time. Can we have the lights up? And let's see just how many questions we've got. Please. I'm going to put my specs on so I can actually see. Oh, there's one right at the back. And if it looks like the microphone's going to take ages, may I encourage you to just yell?
So it's just a small question as a follow-up.
Could I ask you to say who you are and always ask a question, not make a point if possible? Not so that you weren't going to.
Hello, I'm Tom. I'm from Cross Knowledge. The question is, who is responsible, accountable, and who has the ultimate job for managing the framework of how digitalization impacts us? And I think about Russia, and I think about China, and I think about business, consumer, and government. Ultimately, who has to take the lead to protect all of us in this digitalized society?
Does anyone want to go?
So I would say that in anyone's individual dealings with the organisation, then that organisation has to take accountability for how it uses your data and the responsibility for ensuring that the digital or the technology that they're putting in does make it efficient. And we haven't talked about, but you know, most prescriptions today go straight from the GP to a pharmacy. There's no interaction, and one has to ensure it lands at the pharmacy in the right way, and then we treat it in the right way, and we have all of that data. But I would say the individual who's actually contracting with you for that data has the responsibility to use that data and to use that data well on behalf of you as the ultimate customer.
I agree. I think it's we the people. Yeah. We the people. We are the ones that tell governments what should be on their agenda. And if we're not doing that, we're not taking advantage of the democratic societies that we live in. There are so many places in the world where people can't do that. So for me, it's we the people. We have to decide that we are going to take this into our hands, make it a priority for the politicians, get the frameworks in place. That's what restrains business. Business will go after profit. That's what we're here to do. And it is the restraining forces that, and I can't believe I'm saying this because some of the regulation that I have to put up with is so mindless. And then in areas where you need regulation, you say, wow, there's nothing there.
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. Regulation has a role to play. I mean, GDPR is on everybody's agenda, and there's no doubt that regulation has a role to play, but it will never, of its own, solve what we are facing.
Probably not.
So the other agents you've described is business itself, and I've long believed this is a time and opportunity for business to step up and show it can act responsibly on many things. And this is a very good example of it. How it uses technology, how it uses data responsibly, and so on.
Yeah.
So that's the agency of business, to take that responsibility and to be challenged and to be transparent about what they're doing, so that we, the people, can challenge business as well. And the third agent is the people ourselves. But that comes back to things like awareness and understanding. And this Facebook thing that's going on is just an example of how people are beginning to become more aware of exactly that quote, which I love, Moya, which is, if you haven't paid for the product, you're the product. And who's using your data and how. And we have to, and regulations beginning to give us more power to do that, we've got to take some of that agency ourselves. So I think it's the combination of all of those actors, but in slightly different forms.
Just a quick one. And you know, we were talking earlier, this is a brand that's been around for 170 years. It exists today because it's always looked after the customers and the community as well as it needs to, whether it's a digital age or so the responsibility for a business when you have customer base is to have that relationship where they trust you and use that data well. You won't find me on social media because I'm not there, and it's because I am precious about who knows me and what I do. So, and as an individual, I take my personal ownership, but I also, as a business leader, take ownership for the relationship that we have when people do give us our data, because we need it to be able to run an effective and successful service to the public.
I mean, to pick up on Peter's point, I mean, GDPR. So, as an organisation, you know, we effectively certificate, you know, some 2 million individuals a year who are learning a program with us. They're learning a program in some cases directly or through channels. And actually, the discussion we were having just yesterday with our board was, what is our responsibility now as we think about data, as we think about the relationship we have with the individual, the relationship we have with institutions that are actually teaching those individuals. And I was encouraged that actually it's beginning to change the frame of reference for our organisation to think differently about our responsibility to protect that individual and their individual data and their individual rights associated to that. So I think there is a shift, but I also agree with Moya. I mean, this has to be what we take control of. We have to make sure that our voice is heard much more than it is today.
Yeah. And I feel culturally as well that, especially if you're in a function where you're thinking about people. In my previous life at Aviva, we were revising the customer data policy, and basically we got the guys that did all the algorithm work for our policy making and said, right, give us the worst stuff that you can imagine doing with the data. So, and everyone's going, no, you can't do that, you can't do it. It's like, well, of course we can, because how can we protect people against it unless we know what the worst stuff is? But it's quite interesting. Culturally, there's sort of a reluctance to embark on that. But I think if we don't know what we don't know, we're a bit stuffed. It's a strange thing to say, but anyway, you know, so I also feel that's what we have to go after. Anyway, Tom, thank you very much, because that obviously elicited a lot of passion and commitment and great thoughts. Right, next questions. Any up on the balcony? Right, one up at the back, straight in front of me.
Hi, Pauline Valance from Hot Courses. One of the things mentioned earlier was simplicity, and what I've noticed when I've been asked for some companies that I'm subscribed to emails, their privacy notices are so complicated, and I think there should be some strong legislation around simplicity so that the user understands what they're signing up to and how their data is managed.
I'm not sure anyone's going to disagree.
Yeah. Well, that will come out of GDPR.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also honesty as to how that data is being used. And I don't think we've had honesty. I mean, it's Hobson's choice when you sign up to an app, and you're asked, do you sign up to these terms and conditions? Because if you don't get the app, and nobody ever reads them. No. So we've got to be more transparent. This is part of, I think, the point.
Absolutely.
Far more transparent and use plain English so people really know what they have signed up for.
It was a lot easier, wasn't it, in the old days when ITV first launched, because the quid pro quo was you watch the adverts to get the telly. I mean, it was kind of a really easy deal.
You kind of understood the deal.
It's the same thing. We just haven't got the simplicity of that anymore, but that was it. It was a quid pro quo. It was pretty plain. Right, any others? There's one over there.
Hello, I'm Caroline from Young Women's Trust. The number of women in the tech industry is shamefully low. Do you think this will make a difference if something could be done about that to digital inclusion generally, and what do you suggest should be done?
No. I don't think it will. I think, you know, really, if you work for those organizations, you work for the enlargement and the advancement and the greater profitability of those organizations, and you are incented. hugely to make those organizations more and more powerful. And I don't think the incentives work in a different way for women. I haven't seen any evidence of that.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think the first is, yeah, I mean, I think what you're echoing a little bit also, Moya, is what Deborah talked about earlier on the stage, that if you're from outside the tribe and you're in a highly male-dominated environment, then your pressure to conform is so great. But we know that getting more women into tech is important for lots of reasons, not least access to talent and skills, but also bringing different thinking. But you've got to create the environment that allows those different voices to come forward.
I'm slightly at odds with Moya on this one, actually, because I do think, you know, the stat that we had this morning from the platform that, you know, 4,000 A-level students of computer science, 100 of them women, and we're all reporting our gender gaps, and, you know, that gender gap is going to be that gender gap of the future, because the STEM jobs are still going to be the jobs that people want to get into. So I do think actually encouraging more women in, to get more women in, to just influence generally how organisations actually work, that balance will have an impact over time, regardless of the organisation. I think it would be a good thing to do. So I would say in time it will, because it does. And I think we do have a responsibility to encourage our girls and stop the gender typecasting as it seems to be happening at this moment in time.
But Elizabeth, do you think that it's more important for more women to get into technology than it is for more women to lead the organizations? Because I think it's more important for women to lead the organizations, because at least then you have some way of shaping the agenda. Whereas I think if you just get dragged in as a woman to Facebook, given that you're probably 1 in 350, I think the pressures to conform are going to be so great. I think it's only when you get to the top of the organization can you really influence how that organization's culture is going to evolve.
I agree with that, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive, because I think that more organizations will need more technical skills, and that will come through to the top of the organisation as well. So I think it's both that you need. It's not an either or.
But I think the challenge is it is a systemic failure across the educational system, one might say. I mean, we got the quote this morning: 100, young girls taking A-level. If you look across the apprenticeship frameworks, if you look at STEM, if you look at technology, and whether you look at it from an agenda around sort of the number of young female applicants, or if you look at it from the agenda in terms of the number of black, Asian, minority, ethnic, you know, the engineering and STEM are widely underrepresented. And actually what's disturbing is black, Asian, minority, ethnic are more likely to apply for an engineering and IT apprenticeship, but less likely to get it. So there is such a huge shift we have to get in terms of how we think, how we recruit, how we promote, and then when we have the talent in, of creating some very clear opportunities and pathways. You know, that's so, so important. I mean, yes, we need more female leaders, absolutely. But actually, you've got to come right the way back and look at the system as a whole and say, how do you serve those future leaders into work and give them something that actually builds value right from the very beginning? Because I don't think it does today.
And two thoughts at either end of the spectrum. I think the people that are writing algorithms, if you believe that unconscious bias exists, and then they're predominantly men, by definition, you are writing in that bias whether you want to or not. So I think you need to think about that. And then at the other end of the you know, we can use investor pressure. And I think more and more, I'm so pleased to see that investors are waking up and starting asking some quite pokey questions, and so they should. And that's great. And the more we can round that off, the better. Any more questions? I can't believe there aren't any more. Don't be shy. Either that, we've answered every question you've possibly ever had in your whole life. Yes. Please do.
Sorry, it's for all of you on the panel, but particularly given, Moya, your point around the most poignant thing I heard in a long time around, if you're not buying a product, then you are the product. Is it too late? Are we too late? Given what you said, Peter, around the amount of agreements that were signed and the complexity of those, is it too late? Because we've signed up to all of those. And please, for the ones who like irony in the room, yes, we are still encouraging you to tweet continuously all the way through. But essentially, is it too late? Is it too late in terms of where we are? And if not, what do we do? And congratulations on getting back on the FTSE 100.
I don't think it's too late. I sort of agree with Peter that, you know, the Facebook expose is a seminal time.
Yeah.
I don't think it's too late, but I think that it's going to take a massive amount of consumer pressure on governments and regulators to change their agenda. Well, you have to, in order to make these companies change, and in order for them to treat our data in a more respectful and transparent way, you've got to hit them where it hurts. First, put a law in place, and then second, enforce it. It's when you start taking billions out of their profit line, you will see them respond.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely consumer pressure. But it is very challenging.
You saw that with Experian.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the
no, we've
States,
seen it before.
massive data
Yeah,
leak,
yeah,
that pressure and actually
yeah.
understanding what they were doing with that individual data and how it was going to get misused.
But I think, other things, I mean, I mentioned my daughter because I said it troubles me how unprotected a lot of young people are in this digital world, and they play their lives out on social media. And then we all know through the recruitment process, what do? Well, we go Google and we find out all this stuff and we make decisions accordingly, and they're not the right decisions and they're not fair. So there's got to be a bigger societal debate about this. And the regulators, as I said before, have a role to play. But I agree, in the end, it's consumer pressure. I mean, dear, poor old Mark Zuckerberg lost $3.3 billion last week. Don't we all feel sorry for him?
Very careless of it.
Very careless of it. But I think involving investors and others. Yeah. So.
Right, I think we're out of time, so I'm going to quickly ask for a final wrap-up, bringing it back to digital inclusion. Where's the hope? And what's your wish of the audience?
Well, I come back to my first point. We have to think more about the human, and we have to be more humane. I worry still that it's too much about technology. We have to think differently. The agenda around how do we encourage people to understand they've got to retrain, reskill, and as employers, as business, actually here we spend less on employer-provided training in the UK than any other part of the EU other than Greece, Romania, and Poland. So if we're going to support people on this journey of being included in technology, we have to step up and we have to invest more.
Elizabeth?
I think it's about inclusion per se, and that if you create communities and workplace communities where people feel that they're part of it, then naturally you'll give them the digital skills that they require to be able to exist within your organisation and within life more generally. And I think all brands want to be sustainable, so I don't think it's too late, because I think brands will want to be around for decades, like that the Boots has been, and therefore the brands themselves will know that customers need to love their brands, and therefore all of us will address to make sure that we do the right thing by our customers.
Great. Moya?
I'd say be the backlash. It's backlash that's going to change things. Be the backlash.
Yeah, I think that's a great call to arms, Moya, absolutely. I think we're at an inflection point on so many things. I've been saying this for a while. Technology is a massive inflection point of change. The debates we're having around inclusion and all these other things. And we've got to seize this opportunity. We've got to take this opportunity to really address these issues collectively, talk about them influencing governments, regulators, and everybody else. Because there's far more visibility. So a lot of stuff that's been going on that we need to pay attention. And gender pay gap is another great example. I think that's an inflection point where we're getting more transparency and things. Now we've got to take the action to do something about it. And my final point would be, is that Peter Drucker quote, which he said, the best way to predict the future is to help to shape it. And that's what we all need to do. We all have agency in this, whether we're business leaders, parents, HR practitioners, learning and development, we all have agency. And we should be involving ourselves in shaping that future together.
Thank you. So, thank you to the audience for the questions. Huge thanks to the panel. Hopefully it's been terribly rich, provocative, and go forth and be the backlash is what we get from that. Thank you.